Hello, especially for the Dirty Secrets channel. The hollow space. Catherine Morgan stood in her kitchen, watching steam rise from her coffee mug. 15 years of marriage to David had given her everything she thought she wanted: a beautiful colonial home in the suburbs, financial security, and a respectable position in their community. Yet an emptiness had crept in over the years, widening like a crack in a foundation. David remained absorbed in his corporate law practice, his affection now perfunctory, his attention elsewhere. Their conversations had become transactional, focused on schedules and bills. Catherine couldn't remember the last time he really looked at her. She traced the rim of her mug with her finger, wondering when she'd become invisible, and more worryingly, when she stopped minding. At 42, she felt a growing urgency, a sense that life was passing her by while she played the role of the perfect wife. The woman who stared back at her from the mirror each morning seemed like a stranger, someone playing a part in a life that no longer fit. The first tremor. "Your form is improving," said Marco, adjusting Catherine's position during their personal training session. His hands on her shoulders sent an electric current through her body. At 35, Marco possessed the easy confidence she once found in David. He'd been her trainer for 6 months, but only recently had she begun to notice how his eyes lingered on her, how their casual conversations stretched longer after each session. "I've been practicing at home," she replied, catching his gaze in the mirror. "I can tell you're stronger than you realize." His fingers brushed against her arm, lingering just a moment too long. That evening, as David worked late again, Catherine found herself scrolling through Marco's Instagram page, studying his life outside the gym. She closed her laptop quickly when she heard David's key in the door, feeling a flutter of guilt and, more disturbingly, excitement. Notes of desire. The piano had been Catherine's refuge since childhood, but she neglected it over the years. Now, with an emptiness to fill, she hired James Harlow, a renowned pianist who taught select students from his downtown studio. Unlike Marco's raw physicality, James exuded a refined intensity. His slender fingers moved with precision as he demonstrated technique, his voice soft but commanding. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes," he told her during their third lesson. "It's about feeling something so deeply that you have no choice but to express it." Catherine felt his words resonate in places long dormant. When their fingers accidentally touched over the keys, neither pulled away immediately. Later, driving home, she realized she spent the entire lesson barely breathing. The first crossing Catherine hadn't planned it. After a particularly intense training session, Marco had mentioned grabbing coffee. The innocent outing quickly evolved as their conversation deepened, revealing shared dissatisfactions and dreams. When he kissed her in his car, parked discreetly behind the local bookstore, Catherine felt 17 again, reckless, desired, alive. "This is crazy," she whispered against his lips. "Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need," he replied. She returned home 2 hours later than usual, fabricating a story about running errands. David barely looked up from his laptop, nodding absently. The ease of the deception surprised her, as did the lack of guilt she expected to feel. Crescendo. James noticed the change in Catherine, displaying immediately. "There's emotion in your performance today," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Something is different." The confession tumbled out before she could stop it. Not about Marco, but about her marriage, her loneliness. James listened without judgment, eventually sharing his own story of a divorce that had left him wary of commitment but hungry for connection. Their first kiss happened amid sheet music scattered across his piano bench. Unlike the raw passion with Marco, this was measured, deliberate. A slow-building crescendo that left her dizzy with possibility. As weeks passed, Catherine found herself crafting increasingly elaborate lies to create time for both men, each filling different needs she denied for too long. The juggling act. Catherine's life became a carefully orchestrated performance. Mondays and Thursdays belonged to Marco, whose apartment became a sanctuary of physical abandon. Tuesdays and occasional weekends were reserved for James, whose artistic soul connected with hers in ways she hadn't thought possible. The remaining time she performed her role as David's wife with renewed energy, which he attributed to her newfound fitness routine and musical pursuits. She kept separate phones, maintained meticulous calendar entries, and created a complex web of fictional friends and activities to account for her absences. The logistics exhausted her, yet the thrill of managing her double life, triple life, including her marriage, gave her a sense of power and control she never experienced. "You seem different lately," David remarked one evening. "Happier. I am finding myself again," she replied, surprised by the partial truth in her words. Dangerous waters. 6 months into her affairs, Catherine began to notice subtle shifts. Marco grew increasingly possessive, questioning her unavailability on certain days. James, initially respectful of her boundaries, started suggesting a future together, unaware he wasn't her only secret. Meanwhile, David initiated attempts at reconnection, suggesting date nights, asking about her day with genuine interest. His belated attention complicated Catherine's emotional landscape, introducing guilt where there had been only justification. One evening, leaving James' studio, Catherine spotted a colleague of David south across the street. She ducked into a doorway, heart pounding, waiting until the woman passed. The near discovery left her shaken, the fantasy of her separate worlds colliding suddenly vivid and terrifying. Fault lines. The first significant crack appeared when Marco unexpectedly came to Catherine's neighborhood, texting that he happened to be nearby and wanted to surprise her. She frantically called him back, manufacturing a story about being out with David. Marco's silence on the other end spoke volumes. "You reashamed of me," he said finally. "It's complicated," she replied, unable to explain that she was juggling not one but 2 relationships alongside her marriage. That same week, James gave Catherine a key to his apartment, a gesture of trust she accepted with conflicted emotions. Later, scrolling through her phone, she realized she sent identical messages to both men on separate occasions, word-for-word declarations of feeling truly seen for the first time. The realization left her cold. Was she becoming as performative with her lovers as she had been in her marriage? The unraveling Catherine should have known the sender couldn't hold. The collapse began with a simple oversight. She left a earring at Marco's apartment, one James had given her as a gift after an especially meaningful performance. Marco, increasingly suspicious, searched her name online and found a recital program listing her as a student of James Harlow. Acting on jealous impulse, he contacted James through his professional website, presenting himself as a potential student. Their meeting, arranged at a coffee shop Catherine frequented with both men, led to a conversation where patterns became clear. Neither directly accused her, but both men departed with newfound awareness. Within hours, Catherine received nearly identical texts from both, requesting an honest conversation. She sat in her car for an hour, unable to respond to either message, watching her carefully constructed worlds collide in slow motion. The reckoning. The confrontations came in rapid succession. Marco, raw with emotion, demanded to know if he'd been just another distraction. James, more measured but deeply hurt, asked how she could share such intimacy while maintaining such profound deception. Both men revealed their awareness of each other, though neither yet knew about David. That revelation came unexpectedly. Returning home emotionally exhausted, Catherine found David waiting in the living room, a familiar blue scarf in his hands, one she reported lost weeks ago. "James Harlow, his wife called me today," David said quietly. "Apparently, he believed you were separated from your husband. She found this in their apartment and recognized my company logo on the tag." He looked up at her, his expression not angry but profoundly sad. "How long, Catherine? And was it just him?" The house of cards collapsed completely. In the space of 24 hours, Catherine lost everything she had been juggling for nearly a year. After the fall 3 months later, Catherine sat alone in a small apartment across town, surrounded by boxes still half unpacked. The divorce proceedings had begun, surprisingly amicable given the circumstances. David, after the initial shock, admitted his role in their marital disconnect. They spoke more honestly during their separation than they had in years of marriage. Neither Marco nor James had remained in her life, though James had sent a brief, compassionate email acknowledging the pain on all sides. His wife had decided to give their marriage another chance. Catherine ran her fingers over the keys of the small upright piano she purchased, not as fine as James' grand, but hers alone. She played a melancholy piece she'd been practicing, no longer performing for anyone but herself. The woman who had sought visibility through others' eyes was learning to truly see herself. The emptiness remained, but it was no longer a void she needed desperately to fill. Instead, it had become a space of possibility, painful but authentic, where something new might eventually grow. She finished the piece and let the final notes hang in the air of her small, honest life, one that belonged entirely to her. Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, like, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thank you.